Wonderful. Okay, great. Well, thank you all again for being here this evening. I'm Nicole Hirsch. I'm the new president of the Native Plant Society. I just want to acknowledge the rest of the board since I think this is maybe our first in-person meeting since I've been the president. So Vicki Fix is our vice president. Brenda Graff is our secretary. Carol Schvogel is the treasurer. And Rosemary Sodden is maybe not online, but she is a member at large. Yay. Oh, yay. I know that was a tough call. My daughter's there. It's hairspray tonight. Beth Umberger is also a member at large. Ellen Bosman. Probably butchered your last name. Barbara Kafka. Thanks. Yay! And Barb Walker.
Here.
Jennifer Lovering. I'm so sorry. I did not forget. And just thank you all for your service and the work that you put into this group. It is really amazing and just really appreciate it. And then I want to ask if there's any new members either in this room or online that would like to introduce themselves. No, not tonight. Okay, great. Well, then next I'll just go ahead and introduce our speaker. And I should have asked you this beforehand, how to pronounce your last name. Bellangue. David Bellangue is a second-year master's student in crop and soil environmental science in the School of Plant and Environmental Sciences. His research focuses on the establishment of native wildflowers into tall fescue cattle pastures to provide diversified forage for cattle and food for pollinators. The ultimate goal of this research is to develop techniques to allow landowners to establish wildflowers successfully with minimal effort. David grew up in Metro Atlanta and his interests include playing the piano, hiking, cooking, propagating native plants, and reading. The first native plant he grew and one of his favorites is wild columbine. So with that, we introduce David Bellangue, and you can have the floor and I will just help you get set up here and keep on with the slideshow. Thank you so much.
All right, well, thanks you all for coming out and thank you for having me. And I'm going to be talking to you today about native plant propagation. And hopefully you can learn a thing or two about that. All right. Now, can people on Zoom see the slideshow right now?
Yes.
Good, because I've been in some really weird technical things where it's like you put it on present and then it doesn't work for Zoom, but at any rate. So I'm going to be talking about native plant propagation to you all today. And so you've probably seen a lot of headlines in the news, things like, 1/3 of animals and plants at risk of extinction in the United States, 40% of the world plant species are at risk of extinction, and an unprecedented decline in biodiversity and nature at risk. And because so many of these headlines have been appearing, it brings a sense that the earth and biodiversity on this planet is in danger and is not doing well. And this is often the case. You probably all know that as well. There are a couple of key threats to biodiversity that are causing biodiversity loss around the world. Among the most pressing issue is habitat loss and degradation, often through row crop agriculture, expansion of row crop agriculture, and expansion of human settlements. There's also invasive species that are outcompeting native plants when they're introduced into a system and cause severe disruption there. Shown here in the picture down on the left-hand side is autumn olive invasion, a plant you probably all know very well. Overexploitation and the ramifications of that, especially for our most, the keystone species and these very charismatic animals that can often are big, drivers in these ecosystems. An example I have is the bison on the Great Plains and in this region as well. And disruption of key processes that maintain ecosystems. So my work with introducing forbs into cattle pastures, it's sort of analog with the grasslands, and I had to learn a lot about grasslands in order to do that project. And one problem with grasslands is disrupting fire regimes. So people, stopping burning, allowing stuff like this red cedar to come up and outcompete the native grassland flora, causing the decline in those ecosystems. So this has not gone unnoticed, and the United Nations has declared 2021 to 2030 to be the decade on ecological restoration. And the goal of this program that they have is to try and build a global movement for ecological restoration. And ecological restoration entails assisting in the recovery of ecosystems that have been damaged or destroyed by human activity. That could be as little as passive restoration, where you just come in and remove stressors like prevent cattle from grazing, stop logging, and allow the ecosystem to recover naturally. Or it could go as far, especially for heavily degraded sites, for bringing in heavy earth moving equipment to rework the landscape and actively reintroducing plant and animal materials. But also an important part of restoration, restoration ecology is conserving things, conserving the communities we have. Because despite our greater understanding, we're still really bad at rebuilding ecosystems. And for example, for tall grass prairie restorations, that's probably the ecosystem in this country that has the best and most complete data around it. We're still not able to get restorations that can match old growth grasslands in species diversity and in the number of the communities that have. So we're still learning, and so it's imperative to conserve these little intact communities so that, one, they're very precious and invaluable, and two, they offer blueprints for what this area used to look like and how can we get it back to that. But in order for ecological restoration to work, especially for the active ones, we need access to large amounts of properly sourced native plant material in order for these projects to work. And that's a big problem because there has been a severe lack of native plant materials. And while interest in native plants is growing, the supply is still very limited. So many plants lack a commercial seed source. So these are two examples that I've had trouble finding. This one over here is Asclepias variegata, the red ring milkweed. This one, I believe, the Cora Mariana, or it's one of the spur butterfly bees. I did a quick online search. I couldn't find a commercial seed source for that. And they might not be critical for the ecosystem, but would help add diversity. As milkweeds are a host for the monarch butterfly. So these plants have intricate connections to the ecosystems they live in. And by not having a commercial seed source, if we are doing a restoration or doing planting in a garden, these species are going to be missing. And that's going to be a key part of the ecosystem that's going to be missing. So there's a need to increase the capacity and the diversity of our native plant material and our native plant seed supply. One way to do that is to do small scale nurseries. So as small as even in your own backyard. These have a lot of advantages. They can supply local genotype plant material, which has the best conservation benefit for local areas. Excuse me. It helps raise awareness about native plants. So if a lot of people are raising plants in their backyard, it's going to be a lot more visible, and people are going to be a lot more curious about it, and will have greater growth and knowledge in the community. And also, it allows you to take an active role in restoration by providing the propagules for a restoration project. I think I was hearing earlier about attempts to clear old growth woods on campus. Clear out invasively. You can put some stuff in, and if we have a bunch of native plant nurseries, we can provide propagules to put into the landscape. And also, it's pretty easy. I mean, maybe I'm biased, but I think it's pretty easy, and everyone could do it. This is a picture of just this year. I live in an apartment, and with not a lot of money, I was able to grow an abundance of plants from seeds that I collected and seeds that I bought. And I was in an apartment. Imagine what you could do if you had a nice big backyard or like 2-acre property. So it's really easy, and I think everyone can do their part by growing a couple plants. And also, why propagate your own plants? Well, and I'm going to specifically talk about seed, doing it through seed. It can be a lot cheaper than trying to buy a plant, buy plants online. There's a greater diversity available, especially if you don't want to grow like really common or easily available varieties of plants. And I personally think it's very fun and fulfilling to, take that propagule and go from, a little thing that you're babying into a plant that you put into the ground and it flowers. It looks beautiful. So there are a number of different ways you can propagate plants. You can do it through cuttings, which is you take a piece of, actively growing piece of vegetation and induce it to form roots and make its own plant. You can do it through divisions for species that allow it. You can do it through live staking with things like willows or cottonwoods that are very amenable to getting cut up and stuck back in the ground to form roots and new plants. But I prefer doing it through seeds, just because for all the previous methods, you're making an identical copy of that plant, and you're missing out on the genetic variability that wild populations thrive on. And there's just so many possible, so much potential in that seed. And often seeds are it's a lot easier to mail and distribute little seeds than entire plants or even pieces of cuttings. So the purpose of this presentation is to help you all, collect your own seeds, understand the mechanisms and how to break dormancy and get germination, and to start producing more plants yourself. And so it starts with seed collecting. And there are a couple cues that plants give to for their seeds when they're ready to harvest. The seed coat will turn from white or green to tan, dark brown, or black, indicating that the seed is mature and ready to go. If the seed is in a fruit, like with serviceberry or pawpaw, the fruit will get very soft. It might change color, and it'll come off the plant very easily, indicating that it's ripe and ready to go. For capsules that hold seeds, such as this Monarda right here, the capsules will dry, turn brown, and begin to split open. And if you're not sure about some species, or I know there are some species where you can collect the seeds a little bit early to get a jump on germination, you can test out if you have a lot in that population to see if the seeds are mature and ready to go. So here's just an example of the serviceberries turning from that green color to a nice rich red, showing that it's ready to go. Often gets soft. And then here's just the milkweed capsule that's drying and expelling the seeds as it splits open. Now there's a caution with seed collecting. Make sure to never collect seeds from a rare or endangered plant. Got to make sure all of those seeds try to disperse and make a larger wild population. Try to take only a few seeds from each plant. Make sure to get as many plants as possible to increase the amount of genetic diversity that you can capture. Excuse me. Get landowners' permission before collecting. Don't want to anger anyone by showing up unannounced and potentially getting in some hot water. And then never collect individual plants themselves, outside of like plant rescues or that, but on the whole, never collect the actual plants, only seeds for propagation. Okay, now we're going to get into the meat of the presentation, dealing with various factors about germinating seed, including the moisture needs of some seeds, chemical inhibitors, physical dormancy, light, and other dormancies. And I'm gonna break down each of these to make it easier to understand. So we're gonna be starting with the moisture levels that you keep seeds at. And so there are two classes. The first I'm going to start out with are called non-hydrophilic seeds. And these are seeds of species that can dry out and they tolerate desiccation, and they can dry out and still germinate very well. And these seeds often have very excellent long-term storability, and can be stored for many years in food. But there are a lot of species that fall into this category, including this beautiful dense blazing star, Laetus ficata, as well as mountain mints, golden alexander, shooting stars, and milkweed. So these species, they're very easy. You can ship the seeds. You don't have to do much fussing with them. And then the second class is hydrophilic seeds. And these seeds often are found, this is often found in woodland forbs and in plants with very fleshy fruits. And these seeds cannot tolerate drying out, or else the embryo will die. So, and these guys are not very amenable to long-term storage. They can remain viable in the soil, but if you have them in your hand, it's best to go and sow them immediately because their viability drops off very quickly. And oftentimes, a lot of our woodland ephemerals, like I said before, like trilliums, bloodroot, and the dicentros or bloodroot, they exhibit this. And I think the reason that I found is that because these species live in Eastern North America and the deciduous forest belt with even precipitation throughout the year, they didn't need to fear desiccation, so they evolved to not need, to not tolerate desiccation because they would just disperse and be constantly moist. And so it's imperative that these species to keep them moist at all times. Right after you collect them, when you're cleaning them, when you sow them, make sure they do not dry out. All right, and sort of goes hand in hand with that is germination. These are chemicals that prevent germination of the seed. And this is often to prevent the seed from germinating at an unfavorable time in the year in which the little seedling might die. And oftentimes these chemicals are water soluble and will usually get destroyed by either having an animal eat it and having it pass through the animal's intestines, or by weathering from rain and frost and wind. And so that's useful for us because we can go in for some of these species. You can do something called a fermentation soak, where you just take the seeds, you put them in some water, and you let them sit there for around a week or two. I personally like to do a couple of changes of water whenever the water starts to turn a different color or starts to smell funky. And that just leaches out those germination inhibitors and gets rid of them from the seed. And at the end of this process, you wash the seeds really well, with clean water and a little bit of detergent to really make sure a lot of those, any germination inhibitors are washed away. And so examples of this include blue cohosh right here, golden seal, jack-in-the-pulpit, serviceberry, and magnolia. And all of the species that I mentioned also have hydrophilic seeds. So those two things kind of go hand in hand. So now I'm going to get into the different germination style or the different dormancy styles of our wildflowers. And dormancy is something that you have to take into consideration because that's a big part of the plants. Many plants in North America have evolved dormancy in order to tolerate, winters and bad conditions where, it wouldn't be good for a plant to survive. So the first class I'm going to talk about are the non-dormant. I have a little example here with this little blue stem. So the little blue stems and the other species in this area, they have, there's no dormancy and they'll readily germinate when sown at 70 degrees in about 1 to 2 weeks. And I've read from some sources that these seeds, you can treat them as needing cold stratification, but I've had a lot of success with these species where you just sow them and let them go. They're kind of like vegetable seeds or herb seeds. And oftentimes their germination can be enhanced with a period of dry stratification, which is basically just storing the seed dry as you normally would. And so if you do that for a period of time, that'll increase germination as well. And some species that fall into this category are the mountain mints, warm season grasses like this little blue stem, the prairie clovers, tick seed, and evening primrose. And something that goes one thing that often another style of dormancy is physical dormancy. So in many cases, the embryo of these species is ready to go, just need to add water, add oxygen, and they'll germinate. But they're surrounded by a very hard seed coat that prevents water and oxygen from reaching the plant or the little embryo. And so this, this can, prevents the embryo from germinating till that seed coat is worn away, either by passing through an animal or through action of frost or rain. We can speed this up by something called scarification, which is basically to scrape or abrade or get puncture holes in that seed coat to allow water and oxygen in to start germination. And you can do this through 3 ways. You can do through physical scarification, including, but just physically rubbing the seed against, some rough surface, including sandpaper. I've had luck rubbing Kentucky coffee bean seeds against concrete to get them to germinate. So that works well. You can do wet heat where you immerse the seed in near boiling water for, a set period of time. And usually from what I see is you immerse the seeds in near boiling water and let them soak overnight as the water cools down. That should be enough to break the seed coat. And then you can do something with chemical scarification, which I don't really have a lot of experience with just because it's kind of difficult to get sulfuric acid, but use a very strong acid to eat away at the seed coat chemical. And this dormancy style is often seen with legume family members and with the mallows and hibiscus. I've got some things in the chat. Okay, when I move, I'll make sure not to move too much. All right. All right. And then, so speaking of the legume family members of Fabaceae, they are known for being able to fix nitrogen. And they do this through associating with nitrogen fixing bacteria that house them in their roots. And this is not critical for some legume family members or legume species to have this bacteria, but it can enhance their germination, their growth, and their establishment. And you get to add nitrogen into the soil, which is always a plus. And so oftentimes you can find these, it's called inoculum. You often see it for bean seeds where you can get inoculum with the rhizobia bacteria. I know Prairie Moon makes genus-specific inoculum. And so what you would do is just you wet the seeds a little bit before you sow them. And it often comes in either a powder or a liquid. And you just sprinkle it on the seeds to make sure they're well coated and then sow them. And that should have the benefits for the rhizobia. And then we have the seeds that need light. So some of these seeds are, some seeds are very, very small. And so they don't have a lot of resources to try and burst through if they're planted too deeply. And then there's some species that chemically need light in order to germinate, such as milkweed, because they're pretty big, but they need light in order to germinate. And it's really easy to handle these seeds. All you need to do is, surface sow them, plant them on the surface without a covering of soil, and to cover them with a light layer of either coarse sand or vermiculite to keep some moisture around the seeds so they can have that moisture to germinate, and also let some light through so that they have the light. Best of both worlds. Some examples, often the mint family members, because they have the really, really tiny seeds, asters, milkweed, and the lobelias. Okay, so now we're getting into one of the most common dormancy styles for temperate plants, and that's the dormancy that's broken by cold stratification. So this is the most common for temperate plants, and these species often readily germinate after getting exposed to cool and damp conditions. And that's what cold stratification is. A lot of species fall into this category. A lot of really popular ones, like the coneflowers. Milkweeds often need a period of cold stratification. Spicebush, redbuds, and Joe Pyeweed, just to name a few. They often experience these conditions between late fall and early spring. So often people will sow plants and leave them outside in the winter, sow them in late winter, early spring, or in some cases late fall, and just let them naturally stratify that way. Now, alternatively, you can put these seeds in the refrigerator, but it might not work well with some species because they just really need that fluctuating temperature cycle of going from freezing to kind of at around like 35-40 degrees up to 60, and sort of that variation to one sort of break the seed coat open for really hard ones, and just to have that natural variation to tell the seed oh, it's time to go. All right, so now it's getting a little bit more difficult. These species here have something called, or have dormancy that needs to be broken with first warm and then cold stratification. That means that the seeds need to be kept at around 70 degrees Fahrenheit, often for 1 to 3 months. Then they need to experience a period of cold stratification for 1 to 3 months. This is common in early ripening hydrophilic species, such as wild ginger, bloodroot, and liverwort. And for those species, it's really easy because they mature so early in the season. You can basically take the seeds, sow them, and then just leave them for that summer to get warm stratified, leave them over the winter to get cold stratified, then they should pop up and grow for you in the spring. So that's fine. But then there are ones like lilies and the fringe tree. These species mature very late in the season, often early fall. So they miss that period of warm stratification. So if you were to sow them naturally, it would take 2 years in order for them to send up their first cotyledon. And this is an example of fringe tree seedlings here that I'm working with right now, actually. They are something called hypogeal germinators. So during that warm period, they'll send down a root and then they won't do anything else. Then you have that cold period. And then after that cold period, that's when they germinate and send up their first leaf. And so the technique for these species, it's pretty simple. You just put them in probably in a moist baggie with some either damp sand or vermiculite or sphagnum moss, and keep them around 70 degrees Fahrenheit for 1 to 2 months. And then you place them outside in the refrigerator or in the refrigerator for 2 to 3 months. And this can shave a year off of germination time if you're impatient like me and want to see these plants as fast as possible. And that's just a picture of Lilium superbum that I found. I think I was walking in a park in Georgia, and I actually went into a power line right of way and found this species. So that was a pretty neat find. All right, then we get to the trickiest dormancy style. These are called often known as double dormancy. And these have dormancy that can only be broken by multiple cycles of warm and cold stratification. And I'm going to show some books later that have really helped me in this journey. And especially one by William Kalina, who is part of the propagation effort in the New England Native Plant Society. And he says for these species, they're not difficult, but they take a long time because there's really nothing we can do to help speed that process up. They're often hydrophilic, and they're often found in members of the lily family and in our woodland forests. So, popular genre like or genuses such as trilliums, goldens or the Solomon seal, the silver bells, hollies, and trout lilies. And Allium trichocum, the ramps or wild leeks, this is the flower of that. They're also this double dormancy, a double dormant style. And there are a couple of reasons why this is. Some species have extremely hard seed coats that need that time to weather them away enough to allow water and oxygen to the embryo. Sometimes when the seeds are mature, the embryo itself is not mature and needs a period of after ripening in order to be ready to germinate. And sometimes these are they're hypogeal germinators again, where they form roots after the first exposure to cold temperatures. Then they wait for the summer, and then they need another cold period in order to send up their first leaf. And sometimes it's a combination of all of these. I know for Calophyllum thalastroides, the blue cohosh, they have germination inhibitors and extremely hard seed coat, and I believe their embryos are not fully developed at maturity. So sometimes these all come together to where it's going to be a long time for that seed. And really, for these seeds, you just have to clean them the best you can. Often, since they're hydrophilic, clean them, sow them immediately, and just wait. That's really all I can say. I haven't had too much work with these guys just because they're, it's because they're pretty challenging. So I'd like to get more experience with them as I mature as a native plant propagator, and hopefully I'll check back with you and I can bring you a plant that I germinated. And then let's talk about seed storage. So now we know the various dormancy styles. Let's talk about how to store our seeds. So seeds are alive. They've got that tiny embryo that's still biologically active, and it's burning through the fuel that it has for germination. So that's what we call viability, the ability of a plant to germinate. And the reason why it decreases over time is because the embryo is burning through the fuel it needs to germinate if it's still stuck in storage. And there are a couple of ways to increase the viability of these seeds. Basically, anything that can reduce the biological activity of the embryo will increase the viability of the seed. And the most common ways to do this are desiccation, which is drying out the seed, and cold temperatures. So for desiccation, around each 1% reduction in the seed moisture of if a seed doubles the life expectancy of that seed. And this will trigger dormancy and slow down the metabolism so you can keep the seed lasting longer in storage. And with a moisture content of between 3 and 10% for these seeds is a good minimum, good around about is good. Now, if you want to keep them even longer term, this is just for, in your house normally if you dry out the seeds. But if you want to do like what the big seed producers do, you can get silica packets that will dry the seeds out, even, get them down to that really, really low moisture content. It's excellent for it. Now, obviously, the exceptions to this rule are the hydrophilic seeds that you do not want to dry out, and that aren't very amenable to long-term storage. So for the hydrophilic seeds, keep them moist and sow them immediately if you can, or very quickly. I think you have to store the hydrophilic species. Just make sure that you store them with a little baggie with some form of moisture, either through damp, vermiculite, sand, or peat sphagnum moss. They should remain viable for about a year, but if you can, sow them immediately, and you'll have much better outcomes with those. And then cold temperatures. So biological activity decreases with lowering temperatures. So this would increase the viability of your seed because it lowers the biological activity. So you can store the seeds in plastic bags in the refrigerator. I think the refrigerators are maintained at about 40, 35 degrees. And that should help prolong the lifespan of your seeds so that you can get them out, store them longer and have them remain more viable, into more long term. And I didn't have a slide about this, but I'm just going to talk about some, containers you can use for your seeds. You can also come up and look at these if you'd like a closer look at them, but so basically anything that can hold soil and that has drainage holes could be used for growing seeds. So you could buy something special made like this, special community flat. I got this off of Greenhouse Megastore. That's where I get a lot of my propagation material. And so it's like, nice little container, shallow, so keep a lot of moisture in them. Yeah. Thank you. I think, yeah. So you could get something like this. That's purposely built for seed propagation. Also, I like to keep the if I get any vegetable starts or anything like that, keep the little cells that they come in. These are really good for germinating. Even for some big species, I've germinated cup plant in these and just transferred them immediately. You can also just use takeout containers by just poking holes in the bottom of them. Yeah, basically anything if you're imaginative enough to do it. And as long as it has good drainage, it should work. For the media, make sure it it's very friable, doesn't have a lot of big chunks in it, especially for starting the seeds, and make sure it holds a lot of moisture so that the seeds don't dry out and die. So here are just some resources that I've used in my quest to become a better seed propagator. Kind of my go-to source for propagation information and just for thumbing through is the William Kalina. He came up with 2 books, Growing and Propagating the Wildflowers of the US and Canada, and Native Trees, Shrubs, and Vines. These 2 are indispensable, and if you're really into native plants and native plant propagation, I would highly recommend buying these 2 books. They're filled with a bunch of information about individual species. They have a fairly wide mix of genre in them, and it gives seed collecting tips, culture tips, and also in the back, it has a section on propagating. So I don't have all this information stored in my head. So if I need to reference, if a certain seed is hydrophilic or what kind of dormancy style it needs or dormancy breaking, I can just go to the back of this book and check that out. Also, another one that I've kind of recently discovered, at least recently as a couple of years ago, is native plant propagation by Midgley. So she currently lives in Colorado at the moment, and she self-published a native plant propagation book. This one brings together a lot of information from a bunch of different sources, make it more easily accessible and digestible here. She self-publishes this book, and you can get a copy if you email her, and I guess I could probably put the email in the chat for those who are interested. Well, I can do that later, actually. But this has been a really cool tool, cool resource, because as much as I like the William Kalina books for wildflowers, they don't have all of the plants that I'm looking for, and sometimes you can find the germination information here as well. And then for this one is Growing and Propagating Wildflowers by Harry R. Phillips. This one's a little bit older. I believe it was published in 1985, but it has some pretty good information. And if you're trying to grow plants for, on large scale to produce for, plant sale or for restoration, they do have some points on some of the species to aid in doing large scale propagations, like, what's the easiest way to propagate this, when you probably should bump it up to a bigger size in order to sell it, and stuff like that. And then I have a couple of sources down here. I'm not actually sure if we can. I'm gonna see if I can yeah, I can fix it out of here real quick, just so I can show you some of these resources. There. So this is the website I just stumbled upon. It's Tom Coulter's garden website. I'm not sure who he was, but he went to the trouble of gathering and a bunch of different propagation protocols and germination breaking requirements for a bunch of different plants, which is really helpful. And so he includes a lot of basically plants from around the world that have horticultural interest, but there are a lot of native plants mixed in there as well. So if any of the previous sources I've mentioned don't have any information on the species you're looking for, you can come here and see if this one has it, because it probably will. There are a couple of species that didn't work quite well, but it has a good mix. So it has both a perennial database. It also has tree and shrub information as well. This is a really cool website. I come here occasionally to look at species that I need help propagating. Let's see. And then for the more technical minded folks, so those really in the nitty gritty of scientific science of plant propagation, you have the propagation protocols from the Native Plant Network. You can put in the genus name, the species in the box, and it'll give you out, the technical name for the dormancy style. So you have physical, morphological, morphophysiological, stuff like that. So if you're up for that, this is a resource that you can have access to as well. RNGR. I'm not sure. Sorry about that.
It looks like it's reforestation nurseries and genetic resources. I think it's
right there. All right, thank you. It was hidden by the Zoom bar. And then here's just an interesting little website. I believe it's produced by the University of Illinois, I believe. But this is for this prairie species in Central North America. This is a research to see what the seedlings of these plants, some of these plants look like, what the seeds look like, which can be really helpful for both seed collecting and looking at your little flat or your propagation bed to see, like, is that actually the species that I want coming up in there? I haven't used this too much because it is more geared for Central North America, but there's some species that overlap that are kind of useful. So if you want to check it out, I'd encourage you to. Yes. All right. So those are one last source that I forgot to mention. So if you're looking for a real technical manual on germination and everything surrounding germination and dormancy, you can look at Seed, the Ecology, Biogeography, and Evolution of Dormancy and Germination by Bankston and Bankston. Those are two prominent plant scientists who work a lot with plant germination. And that book is filled with information about the various kinds of dormancy, if you'd be interested in learning about that. And it also gives a list of a lot of different dormancies and dormancy breaking requirements for a lot of different species as well. Very good. Yes, I can definitely send this list of resources and an email if people are interested in that. All right, so for the last few minutes, I'm just going to talk about some of the research, my graduate research that I've been doing at Virginia Tech. I think, like Nicole alluded to, it was around finding ways to interseed native forbs into tall fescue cattle patches. So the premise around this was that pollinators are declining, and that's not very good because they're very important. And so one of the sort causes of this decline is that a lot of the plants that they depend on for food from nectar and pollen, and also their host sources for butterflies and bees, for providing resources, they're often getting destroyed through intensive agriculture and urban development, and the increased use of herbicide, broad spectrum herbicide. And so we have a lot of cattle pastures in the southeast that are tall fescue that you could stack two ecosystem services, both forage production for cattle, and also by interseeding wildflowers into these pastures, we can provide food for bees. And because these pastures are so widespread in the southeast, it could be a very good way to, maybe an additional incentive to make these lands and help farmers make their land more ecologically valuable to the environment. But the southeast lacks a lot of the information to establish native forbs. There is some work out of the Central North America because they have very good work with the tallgrass prairie restoration. But that might not be the most appropriate for our region because we have different climate, different soils, and also different weed community than the Midwest. So southeast specific establishment information is lacking. And so they could eat some of them. I think it probably would involve changing some of the grazing regimes to do more rotational so that the cows aren't on there all the time so that they wouldn't eat the wildflowers down. So we looked at this through two different experiments. So one was set up before I got to Virginia Tech. This is we're going to call the site preparation experiment. This was basically testing a range of different site preparation techniques, stuff that you would do to the cattle pasture in order to help establish these wildflowers. And so we did it through a control strip that was seeded and then otherwise unmanipulated. We did it through one that was tilled twice prior to being seeded. And we had 6 herbicide treatments Most of them were designed to only weaken the tall fescue so that we could try and see if the wildflowers could coexist with the fescue. And then there was one that was 2% Roundup that was designed to kill the fescue to see what would happen. And my job in this project was to evaluate and see, what success we got from that. And success we defined it as between 2 to 3 target plants per square meter. Just, the number of plants in that strip that's kind of average. And we predicted that the treatment that most severely disrupted the tall fescue sod or the tall fescue root masses would be better at establishing these native plants. Then we also looked at, we wanted to test a few other factors that we weren't able to test with the site preparation. And I should also mention that the site preparation was also testing different seasons of sowing. So one round was sown in the summer in June, and another round was sown in November to see if there was a good time to sow these. And so we also wanted to test whether seeding rates and whether pre-seeding stratification would help these, establish these wildflowers. And so we tested 4 different seeding rates, 2.24, 11.2, 28, and 56 kilograms per hectare. And we tested whether these seeds stratified in the refrigerator for around 30 days and then sown if they would have, what effect that would have on establishment. We predicted that the higher seeding rates of establishment would increase the abundance of our target plants and the richness. And so for the results, for the site preparation experiment, we found that all of the treatments really didn't get, establish sufficient numbers of plants. I think our the highest treatment we had, the 2% glyphosate that killed the fescue, it had around 0.35 target plants per square meter, so not the 2 to 3 that we defined as success. But despite all of those not doing well, the glyphosate did have the highest richness and abundance, the 2% glyphosate that killed the sod, and the fall sun treatments had a higher abundance and richness than the summer sun. And then for the seed and stratification rates, we found that the higher seeding rates did result in a greater establishment and greater target plant abundance. Compared to our lowest seeding rate of 2.24, 56 kilograms per hectare resulted in almost 3 times as many target plants. So putting more seed down helped increase abundance. But an interesting thing is that richness didn't vary a lot between the treatment levels. And I really thought that the cold stratification would improve that a lot. But it might have been for the species that we used, it wasn't a long enough period, because I did notice that some of the plants we used among the ones we had, Golden Alexander and Rattlesnake Master, they started to appear in our plots after a period of natural stratification. So maybe it might not have been enough. So maybe 60 to 90 days would have been better. And so we came up with 3 recommendations from this study. So one that despite the goal of this project being to establish harmony between the wildflowers and the fescue, so we could have both flowers and forage, it seems that eliminating the pasture grass is better for establishing the wildflowers, which makes sense since these exotic cool season grasses are often very aggressive and kind of monopolize the site. So in the fall, or use stratified seed for an early summer planting, just because stratification does help boost germination. And it's just another thing that we can do to tip the balance in the wildflower's favor. And to use a higher seeding rate to improve establishment. And also another important thing that could potentially compromise with lower seeding rate, or a lower seeding rate could be used if you had really intense site preparation, like you would kill the fescue or really disrupt it, or if you do a lot of post sowing management of that, where you cut the vegetation to the ground each time to make sure that it doesn't overtop the seeding. So we hope that these recommendations could be helpful for landowners, and this could be disseminated and maybe spur more research into getting these getting more greater utilization of our native flora into agriculture. And so these are my photo credits, and I can take any questions. And if you have any other questions before I leave, here's my email down below. Yeah.
In established meadows, the thing I read it on, there's something it's hard. I have a lot of videos and I can't get the grass established. You know, using the plant, and you have to do seeds, I don't know, maybe it's a combination. When I read online, some people will say, they get all grasses or all of the perennial plants, they don't get that mix of seeds, something.
Interesting. I know I'm, oh, yes, that's right. So for some of the, established meadows, some people have problems with establishing a lot of perennials, and, some people might have all grasses or all forbs, but not that mixture that we were looking for. So, in some of them, especially for like the smaller meadows, I've heard that you could use a combination of plugs and seeds. For like the more difficult to establish plants, and you put in, you grow the seeds up and put them in as plugs, and then you would seed around them, pretty high density for plants that you definitely know are going to be coming up from seed, so that you can get the best of both plugs and seeds. Oh, yes.
In your first part of your talk, when you're talking about all the ways to get the seeds to grow, you didn't mention the water source. And I think that's important since you're talking about living in an apartment. Most people like to use tap water, which has a lot of chlorine and what. So I'm surprised you didn't mention how your water is.
So given that, water is really important, and during the first part of my talk about how water is very important for these plants, I didn't mention what water source I was using and what way, since water is very important, especially tap water. I was able to use tap water on all my plants and they did fine, but I know definitely for some of the, carnivorous plants, which I have some experience with, or from more sensitive plant species, they definitely need, you'd have to use distilled water or rainwater collected, just because they're a little bit more finicky about the high salt concentration. Or for my case, I think I live in a pretty high, pretty base rich soil area. So our water, I believe, is pretty basic. And so for species that like acidity, this would be very detrimental to that. So yeah, I guess, it depends on the species. For the hardier ones, I think tap water is fine, but for more finicky ones, I definitely either distilled water, reverse osmosis, or rainwater would be the best. Let me see.
And I have another question.
Well, yes.
For me, a meadow is completely different from a pasture. So this last part of your talk was what I thought the whole talk was about pretty much, because there's so much to explain.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you're just talking about pasture and now you're gonna try to go to put plants in it, that's not establishing a meadow at all.
No, so because what you think of with a meadow is very different from what you think of pasture, pasture land. So it would, it wouldn't very much, wouldn't work very well to try and put plants into a pasture. And I don't think we were very, going for, I guess the meadow per se of like, really, really high numbers of forbs. We were trying to go for maybe a more grassy mix, so something that has a bit more grass. Now I know for in some of my research, the for doing prairie restoration, that I think one benchmark I found is that you want to have at least between five wildflowers per square meter. And I know for some cattle owners, that might be really high numbers of forbs. So I think cattle owners would be able to handle these lower numbers of forbs.
I don't quite understand you saying you totally eliminate the grass and wildflowers from up there. But how would a farmer use that information? Grasses, right?
Yeah. So given that we found that completely eliminating the pasture grasses worked the best in establishing these plants, how would a cattle owner use that information to get better, to establish these plants, to do that establishment that we want? And Yeah, I wasn't very thrilled about that either, because I was thinking the exact same things, like, yeah, I'm gonna tell a cattle owner, yeah, if you want to get the wildflowers, just kill the grasses that your cows depend on and put the wildflowers in. So definitely, I'd like more research in figuring out what would be better ways to establish these plants, so that we could have some parity, so that we could have some wildflowers and some grasses. I suppose an alternative that I have seen is that at the edges of your pastures, or maybe in like a particular area, but not the entire pasture, you could have just wildflower strips that you can get the benefits for pollinators while also maintaining forage production. But I kind of like to see if, I think it'd probably be possible to try and, mix them together. I know that this work is also happening with with warm season pasture grasses as well. And they're running into some similar issues where the grass is just really vigorous. So I think that, prairies have been doing this, where you have both a mixture of grasses and forbs. So there has to be a way to do it. Maybe just need more research to figure that out.
So are there native plants that are good forage for cattle that maybe you can remove from the field and allow people to have to, like, so be more of a mode situation where the cattle are eating the plants down and then we're removing?
Yeah. So they're given, along the same lines as the last question, are there native plants that are palatable to cattle that could be used as forage, where the cattle could be brought in to eat them down, and then they're be removed so that these forbs could grow up and flower? And there definitely are some. I need to do more research on that, but definitely the species we used in the mix. Definitely a lot of our native legumes. So our, what is it? I'm trying to think of the common names. But the desmodiums, prairie clovers, Illinois bunchflower. So a lot of these legumes, just like our other agricultural legumes, like the trifolium clovers, and they're very good for cattle and very palatable. So definitely, I think those could be used. I know that a lot of our warm season grasses are also very palatable to cattle, and so I think those could be used in greater utilization. I personally I support using our native warm season grasses over non-native cool season grasses such as tall fescue and orchard grass. But yeah, so there are some.
One landowner, I don't know if he's contacted you, I did send information about the program. In the Elliott Valley, there are a handful of the farmers that bring in cattle once or twice or 3 times through the season, and they do them kind of in strips, and it's very light grazing. And this one particular one he didn't realize it, so we pointed out a lot of senna in his pasture. And if you've ever grown senna and tried to move it because you didn't really want it in that place, you can move it and it will grow where you move it, but it will never stop growing where you move it. And I'm wondering if senna, didn't you have a picture of senna up there?
I did.
And we have 2 species that are native. And he didn't even realize that they had all kinds of sulfur caterpillars along with this plant. But because I've tried to move it many times and it keeps coming back up, it seems like cattle should be able to eat some of the plants down, especially if they're being moved, And that, as kind of what Nicole was saying, that we have so fairly many natives that would respond well and come right back up and bloom.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting on some of the people down there, because this person brings his cattle in like a truck. And they may stay on a farm, say, a week, and maybe they'll do a big strip of a pasture for 2 days, and then they just move the road. It's really bad. I never was aware of that. But then to go through that and see what's actually surviving, that's a good native. And if that, I don't think he had that intended. In fact, he's trying to tell out certain grasses, including some that I think we hope they might keep, but he thinks they're not good forage, but they're native grasses. So that might be a good educational thing to look into. Do people that are raising cattle need to know that maybe some of these grasses could help the cattle Or even if they're not being used by the cattle, somehow help on the system, the ecosystem of their pasture.
Okay, so there are some landowners in the Ellet Valley that, do rotational grazing with bringing cattle, lightly graze a pasture area in big strips. And apparently, some of these areas have, a lot of wild senna and other native species coming up in them. And, so there might be a way to, is there a way to educate landowners about, teaching them what native plants might be good for cattle and what they could keep, just now without it having to add seed to it. So that's a really interesting point because that I know one of the problems that I ran into with this project is that some of the seeds, especially to do like a big pasture for interseeding, they're really expensive just because we don't have that capacity up, and they're still like some of them like our native grasses, you can get them pretty cheap by the pounds, around like $20. But for some of the forbs like the Ohio spiderwort or some of the asters, it's going to be going like $300-400 a pound. So I think that would be a great educational opportunity to do, maybe even do more trials to see what native plants are, could be beneficial and what could work in a grazing system. Because, definitely native plants need more, research on them just because, so much of the pasture and agronomic world has been dominated by, grasses that do well in Europe or like the legumes that do well in Europe. So we'll bring them over here. But, I think doing education for the cattle owners would be great. Doing more research onto what, what other plants what other plants are edible for cattle could be great. And definitely like we're, for that situation where the landowner has a bunch of senna right there and other species, you wouldn't need to add anything. You just like manage it maybe a little bit more, or try not to, take out the plants that you have, and you wouldn't even have to seed anything. So that would be, I think that's a great, great point. Let me get to one of the questions on Zoom here. So have you heard of or worked with the Southeast Grassland Initiative, Southeast Grassland Institute? I have heard of them and I have seen their website. I've not had the chance to work with any of them yet, but I'd definitely like to in the coming years if possible. Let's see. Oh no. Do the plants you are growing offer the same feed value for cattle? That's a good point. I was not a cattle person, so I know there was another PhD who's a friend of mine who was the cattle person working with the forage and all of that. I did not have the knowledge about cattle operations, but I know definitely the legumes that we use. So I knew we had Illinois bunchflower, prairie clovers, so the dahlias, and there's a lot of desmodiums and lespedezas. I forget what how many of those are, but I know those are probably the forbs are often high in protein because they can fix nitrogen, and so they often have they're pretty good nutritive value. And I think the warm season grasses, so there's been a lot of work with the native warm season grasses, not a lot with the forbs. But I know with the warm season grasses, they have, they have a comparable, and in some cases, a better nutritive value than some cool season grasses. They're just not more widely used because the warm season grasses are a little bit more sensitive and they can't take something called continuous grazing, where you just put the cattle out there and you just let them eat all the time. Fescue is really, really hardy and it's really tolerant of that. And so that's why it's been a very popular choice for cattle owners, just because it can handle a lot of abuse like that. But definitely with some change, if you want to change to a more rotational grazing where you just move the cattle through, the warm season grasses and our forbs are much better at handling that than just continuous grazing. There you go. I understand that the seeds of some grasses are tough for seed drills to handle. Yes, I think they make seed. I think because it's becoming more common to use native plants in restoration, especially out of the Midwest with all the restoration that they've been doing. There are companies that are starting to develop more native seed specific grass till or grass drills for, both native seed and for grass seed as well. But I think they're still a little bit expensive, but they're hopefully will come down in price as people start to realize, hey, these native plants are great.
I'm not familiar with the term seed drill. Could you explain that?
Yes, so seed drill might be an unfamiliar term for some people. Could you explain that? And so, see, how would I explain that? So you know how you have a corn planter that will go through the field and plant the corn with has a makes a furrow, puts the seed down and covers the furrow up. So seed drills, it's basically like that, where it's a device where you put the seed in, it has wheels or discs that open the seed up along a row, puts the seed down, then covers it up. Yes.
You have to, thank you, and then you have to sometimes it is, like a middle, that shoots out the seed.
Oh yeah, the broadcast seeder.
Small, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so you can do that. I know a lot of people have been doing, for small scale. And I've even seen some people, I mean, if you have enough time, you could just do a pretty big property if you just go around. And I know that they do start to make some of the smaller seed drills that could be ATV pulled as well. So you wouldn't need a big, big tractor to pull it.
Did you do in preparation of the site or consider doing it with just a prescribed gun?
So I'm guessing you're referring to the second part of the talk.
Yeah,
Yes.
what you utilize. I didn't know if you had tried any other.
Yes.
Especially prescribed gun.
So for my my graduate research, did we try any methods such as prescribed burns to weaken the tall fescue and make the seedbed ready? We did not. So what we did, so aside from the for the site preparation experiment, we had the seed drill and we had the various herbicides. We did not do any burns. I would have liked to have done some burns, but I know that burns are still not looked on favorably here, especially with some of the cattle owners, and they might look at it as a nuisance. But if there was a possibility to do that, I would. That was actually one of the other things that I thought about. It's like, what if we burn it instead of doing herbicides? That might weaken it enough to help the wildflowers establish. Yes.
Right in Colorado, where my family lives, they are, I think it's NRCS is paying the farmers, paying for seed for farmers. There's a lot of irrigation there, circular irrigation. And so they're paying them in those corners that the irrigation doesn't reach. They're paying them to put wildflowers in those corners to provide areas for pollination.
Very cool. So apparently in Colorado, the NRCS, which is the Natural Resource Conservation Service, is paying farmers to put wildflower seeds in areas not reached by the irrigation to provide food for pollinators. And I think that's a great way to utilize this space where it's like it's not able to be reached by irrigation, so it's not going to be good for crops, but you still have this space. That's a great way to incorporate pollinator habitat into agricultural areas, which is really good.
Brian Murphy? He's retired. But anyway, he's out 42, and he bought some property that was run cattle was run. And he doesn't run cattle, he doesn't run cattle, but he's established a pretty good fields of native plants. So I can give you his email address if you want to get something. That's what he knows what he's done over the years. So it's amazing what he has done over the years. Yeah, concentrating on natives and trying to take advantage of this mass acreage of the habitats and what can grow there. So just huge displays of just about everything in that. It's Brian Murphy. He was the department chair of fisheries and wildlife, back in the early 2000s, I don't know all this together. But he lives in Reason, it's wonderful, and he loves to share. We've had quite a few bird walks, with the bird club out there. And his habitat is so rich. And I know he'd be glad to share, a walk. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely would like his contact information. That sounds, like it'd be really, really fun to go to or check out this place. Yeah.
I'm sure we can find out, the neighbors will know.
Any other questions?
Yes.
No, but thank you.
Oh, of course, thank you.
Now do you have your phone?
I don't have it yet, but I've done all the work for my master's. I actually just last Friday submitted my thesis to the graduate school, so hopefully they'll check off and be like, that looks good.
Congratulations.
Oh, I did on the yeah. Also, if you guys like these plants here are for sale, if you'd like to come up and have a look. So I got a lot of plants and they like to get some, gold. So we like to come up and take a look.
Wait, I just want to mention, you have a spreadsheet, right?
I do.
Everything that he has for sale, so maybe we can send around your resources and your slides.
Yes.
And maybe your spreadsheet as well.
Yes.
And that could be a helpful way for you to garner some business.
Yeah. I hope you guys.
Thank you, thank you. Hi, everyone. So we're just gonna continue with some club business. David, you're welcome to stick around or, have some sales along the side here. But Ellen, if you want to kick us off, if you don't mind coming up here and just giving us a quick update on the plant sale.
Again, thank you, David. I'm very excited to be propagating. Speaking of propagation, we have our annual native plant sale on June 10th. But a fantastic crew of people that are working on everything from signs, another group working on PR, one group working on growing. So I'm just seeing incredible teamwork there. One of the great needs that we'll have is on June 9th. Will be Friday afternoon or morning, we'll see. June 9th, we'll be loading the plants and taking them to Seeds, the Price Nature Center. And then on Saturday, we'll get started real early, just making sure everything's where it needs to be. So if you're free that day, I want to invite you. I think many of you have joined us before, but I learned so much from the customers, from listening to our more knowledgeable people. And for me to introduce people to growing native plants, I know it's going to open up their world and be discovering all sorts of wildlife, native bumblebees, hummingbirds, songbirds, wasps, butterflies. So it's just, I think, really fits into our mission. So, and if you'd like to help before then, you can reach out to any of us on the plant sale committee. Vicki Fix is working on all the signage. Beth Umberger and Brenda are growing managers. And Barbara, excuse me, yes. Barbara Kafka. Yeah, she wasn't here. Yeah.
Hi, Barb.
Now you're gonna have to straighten that out again, didn't you? Oh, Rosemary Swadden is working with PR. And who else am I missing? Lori Jones, yes, is joining us, and she is over all the retail. So when, yes, thank you. Ewing, yes, when Ewing is doing all of the booths, so, and we're working out all those plans. So please see one of us after or reach out over email. Thank you.
I think that's one of the master gardener colleges this year.
Yeah, we're gonna invite them.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ellen. We're really looking forward to that. Sure. Got a
So
little
people-
pop-up presentation from Beth.
People do ask.
Will
me
you
about-
just come in front of the camera?
I'm going
here?
to.
Okay.
So people have been asking me about pots. So the kind of pots we're wanting are like 2-inch pots. And they can come in different, some have, but they're 2-inch pots. This is a quart. It's also called a 4-inch pot. That's a standard one you buy at nurseries. And then gallons, and gallons can look all different kinds of ways. But they can look like that. Like that. So these are the gallons. Yeah, I'm trying to show them. Well, okay, I'll show them to you personally. So if you have pots, we're not in great need because Barbara set us up pretty good, but if you have pots that you want to donate, especially these 2-inch pots, you can bring them to the museum and leave them in front of the shed, or you can put them on my house at 915 porch at 915 College Christian. And if you are going to grow plants, this is a good time to start because it's been mild, but you can divide them from your yard if you want. We're using potting mix and you can get it at the museum or you can get it on my porch. And there's pots on my porch too, so you can do pots. And we can also, if you need us to, we can come to your yard and take the divisions, get people to do that. How clean do you want the How clean? They don't have to be clean at all. Yeah.
Well, I want to know where your museum is. You're just saying museum.
Montgomery Museum.
Montgomery Museum is 300 Pepper Street in Christiansburg. And my home is 915 College Street in Christiansburg. And we probably email. We'll
And
put
if
that.
you're not there, they can leave.
Leave it on the porch.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Plant Committee. Next we have the Publicity Committee, which I think Brenda is gonna step in for Barb Walker. Don't worry, Barb.
Yeah, not on the hot.
We had a meeting last night of the publicity members. A lot of them had filled out the survey last fall that Nicole had sent out to the members, asking them what they liked about the chapter and what they would like us to do in that. So we're getting a lot of people like that. And basically the mission of the publicity committee is to take the ideas that other people come up with, like the program committee or something like that, and then let the public and the members know what's happening. This includes the monthly chapter meetings, field trips, tabling events where we have a table and then we have material there for people to look at and to advertise our chapter and our purposes in that. And we've been trying to figure out, we need help for doing a monthly list of events on our public listserv. We have I think around 272 people on that. That includes both public and paid members. And we think that's the best way to advertise is to have like a monthly list of our meetings, our field trips and other local native plant events and that. And that makes certain that not everybody gets overloaded with all of the emails and everything. So we figure once a month. Now, I had been doing this back in 2020 and 2021, but we need somebody else to restart it. So 1 or 2 people, it would only take like an hour to a month. And then I've got a template and I can let you know which listservs that I've been searching for in that and then help you get going. And then we would just put it in the public listserv once a month then. So that's the main thing that we need help with. We're gonna be working on some new posters in that. Carol Schwobel had done one last year for deer, hungry deer that keep eating up all of our plants and that. And we're thinking of doing another one on invasive plants for identification, the invasive plants in that. Possibly pollinator insects, photos of them, things like that. We need people, if there's anybody in the chapter that has graphic design experience. What we need to do before we can send the poster design to the sign stores that make the physically make the sign for us and that, if we can get it graphically designed, set up so that they can use it to produce the actual posters and that, it only costs us $50 in. If they have to create it from scratch, it costs like $200 for them to design the poster and everything and then make the poster itself. So that's another thing that we need help with, is anybody has any graphic design. If nobody does, then we might need to hire a graphic designer, and that's going to take more money, of course, which would be not so good. We also need a chair of the committee, and that would be just like coordinating different portions of the publicity. The tabling events, I'm kind of handling those. I'll get volunteers and then make certain that we've got posters and brochures and everything. Tabling events would include like our bare root plant sale, our native plant sale, the National Forest Appreciation Day, which Mary Rhodes had created by the Blacksburg mayor, and Pokey Bug Fest, Heritage Day, things like that, that we can help let the public know about native plants and what we'd like them to teach them in that anyways. And that's basically the three things we need is the monthly list of events, putting it up on listserv, graphic arts designer, and a chair. So.
Easy peasy.
Mhm.
Well, hopefully you'll get some folks reaching out to you. Next, I think I'm just gonna try and share the screen real quick again and take you all to our website. So bear with me here. I'm sure there's a better way to get here. Ooh, it's a nice photo. Okay, so share screen, here we are. And the bare root orders just went live this afternoon. So here you can see in our news feed, place your orders now. And you can come here to this page and see the trees that we have available. And then these are all the partners and the partner locations. So each of these locations will be distributing native bare root trees and shrubs in their local communities. So we'll have a spot in Blacksburg, Christiansburg, Floyd, Radford, Pulaski, Newport and Giles, and Harrisburg and Giles. Says Pembroke and Giles, which is really exciting. So that is live, and we will start. We have a flyer that the committee made. And so we'll start to distribute that flyer to get the word out that the sale is open. We increased our native plants this year, so we have 1,250 plants to distribute in the community. So I just wanted that sort of hot off the presses. So we'll make sure that you all get that in your inbox. Carol, do you want to say a reminder about the Plant Invaders book?
Oh, well, we have it for sale. The sale is going out with this about 160 years, so we are selling them to members.
Sure.
Yeah, so this is the book. I think it's the 4th edition, I can't remember, but 5th. And it only comes out once every about 6 years. We have discounted it for members. You could go online at the same website And if you want to use a credit card, you can use a credit card there. And we will get in touch with you and see how to get it to you. We have Brenda in Christiansburg and I'm in Blacksburg. We can deliver it to you or get it to you, or you can drop by and pick it up. But at any rate, it's $5 for members, and non-members are asked to donate $10, $15, whatever you think you would like to donate to our chapter. So I guess that's it. Yes,
Many do you have left on the table?
I have 3 left on the table, so. Yeah, and I've got plenty at my house and so does Brenda, so. We will be selling them for the next, until we're out of them. We started out with 100, so, yeah, okay.
Is this the latest edition?
Yes, it is. It's, someone asked, is that the latest edition? And yes, it is. It's hot off the press. We only got it about, what, a month or 2 ago? But we'll be selling them until we're done, so.
So you have those at the plant, so you don't want to.
Oh, yes, we will have them at the plant sale. We'll have them at anywhere that we have a booth. We will be selling these as well. So probably in the Blacksburg when we do the plant distribution, but probably not at each of those because I'm not sure if we can get them that thinly distributed. So yes, we'll have them available.
Thank you. And another note on that, the Plant Southwest campaign bought 2 boxes of those books that are distributing to local nonprofits, local governments, local community groups, and local libraries for free. So if anybody in this room represents any of those groups, let me know. I have copies of that book that I can give you today. And just continue to get the word out that we do have some copies for free for local groups. Let's see, anything else? I have some Plant Southwest stickers in the back, as well as some signs. Carol, can you just hold up one of those Plant Southwest signs? Again, this is for any community groups that are doing any tabling or want to advertise the Plant Southwest Virginia Natives campaign. There's stands for those as well, and those are free of charge to get the word out about the campaign. So if anybody online is interested. And I think last but not least that I'll say is that our next meeting will be in this room at March 14th online, and Leighton Reed, who's assistant professor at Virginia Tech, and his research focuses on restoration ecology, and he has a restoration lab that he will talk about. And I think David is good friends with Leighton. So does anyone else have any other comments or thoughts, ideas they want to share with the group before we close? Great. Well, thank you all so much for coming and bearing with us with those technical challenges. I think we've got it. We know how it works for next time. And we'll try and figure out the microphone thing so you can walk around if you want. But other than that, thank you all so much. We appreciate it. We'll see y'all soon. I'm going to log off.